guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to be doing a review on a new brand of polymer clay. So this is Papa's Clay, which is a really nice new brand of clay, and I'm going to be doing a rundown today on all of the pros and cons to this brand and why I think you should check it out. So things that we are going to be covering today is first off the colour range that they have. We're also going to be covering colour mixing, how the texture of the clay and how it conditions, different techniques such as canes, Mokume, gane and mixed media, and then finally we'll be going over the strength of the clay. So here are the colours that you have. So let me just take away these two for the moment. So you can see we have the reds, purples, blues, yellows, greens, browns, blacks, a flesh colour, white, a really nice turquoise colour, and of course a pink. Now I have had to open all of these packets so that I could get these techniques prepared, but as you can see we have a nice wide range of colours. Now of course there doesn't seem to be any translucent or metallic at the moment. Hopefully they'll get introduced in the future, but for the moment we just have regular opaque colours. So the next thing I want to demonstrate is the colour mixing. Now while we're going over the colour mixing, I want to just go over how really nice and bright these colours are. They really do have a very nice vibrancy to them, and so you'll find that when you're mixing colours, more often than not you will not end up with mud, you'll end up with a really nice bright colour. So I've just got some yellow and red here, no particular colour recipe here. And while we're talking about colour mixing, I should also talk about conditioning, since we are going to be working with the clay. You could see that it's kind of crumbly and brittle when you first cut it. Now this is not because the clay is old. If you have a look here, you can see how nice and soft it is. So it's got nothing to do with that. This is a nice fresh piece of clay. It's just because the clay has kind of a leathery texture to it, and so this causes it to be a little bit on the crumbly side before you have conditioned it. So what you want to do is you want to warm it up in your hands first, and then you want to run it through the pasta machine. So I'm just going to run that through very quickly, and you can see here that it does crumble a bit. If you find that, you can always just condition it a little bit with a roller, but in general it's fine. You're going to find that it crumbles a little bit in the beginning. To avoid that, you can of course use a roller. Something else that you can do to warm up the clay, because the warmer it gets the less crumbly it is you can use a heat gun on its lowest setting, or you can even use a hairdryer to warm it up. So I'll run that through again. You can see this time that it did not crumble. So I'm going to fold it over, run it through again. I'm going to take it down a few settings, and now I'm just going to run it through over and over again until we mix through our colour. So you can see here that red is really dominant, and so some colours are going to be stronger than others. That yellow hasn't made a huge impact on that red, so I might actually add a little bit more yellow to get more of an orange colour to show you. But you can see how it blends together. It really blends together quite nicely. You don't see little particles or anything like that, and you get a really nice strong bright colour. Now something I do want to point out while colour mixing here, I've added some more yellow. Now hopefully you can see here how interesting that mixing can be, because the clay is a little bit on the crumbly side when you first start conditioning it. If you add the two colours together, you can end up with some really interesting effects. Like you can see here, we have some more crackly effects. So that's a technique that I might actually end up exploring, where we get this interesting kind of landscape effect. So that's just something that I thought I should point out to you, how it looks. So I'm going to finish conditioning this together and we'll see the colour we get. Okay, and so here you can see the colour. It's a really beautiful mix between this red and, if I bring it over, this yellow. You can see here that again the red is really strong, and so you might want to add less red than I did, but you get this really beautiful sunset kind of orange. And also see how the colours have blended together really nicely. You don't get the kind of particle effect, it blends together smoothly so that you get a nice consistent colour. So mixing colours with this clay works really well, especially since it is has a really nice bright variety of colours, and so you can mix up a bunch of different colours with it. Okay, now we were talking about texture a minute ago. Now I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but hopefully if I direct that you can see that it has tiny little pits in the surface of the clay, and the general feel of the clay kind of has a leathery satin finish, and so it has little pits in the surface. So that's something to keep note of, because that will affect the techniques, and I will show you more of that later on, how it affects the techniques, but it also affects the finish of your piece. You're not going to be able to sand this. You can sand it, but don't expect it to wear away at these pits, because it's in the clay, and so you're going to want to settle for a matte finish generally with this clay. You can gloss it up, but just keep in mind that it is going to show up all of those pits, so just be aware of that. Okay, now I'm going to go over the techniques that you can do. Caning works really nicely with this clay. It keeps its shape really well. You can see here these little Skinner Blend jelly rolls that we have a really nice, somewhat crisp cane. Now because of the texture in the clay, you're going to find that the image is a little blurry. I'm not sure if you can see that on the camera, but it does have a slightly more blurry image than canes made with some of the other non-textured brands would. So just keep that in mind when you're creating complex canes, because you may find the images are too blurry for you to get really fine details. So for simplistic canes such as jelly rolls, or even simpler flower canes, this will work really well because it's a nice clay to work with as far as canes go, but just bear in mind that the texture in the clay may hinder the image. Now another thing I want you to keep in mind is when you're conditioning this, because when you condition it, it becomes really soft. When you are reducing the cane, you're going to find that it's really soft, so you may find that it distorts a bit. So again, that's another thing where using simpler cane designs would work well for this clay, whereas more complex ones I would use a more different brand such as Kato, which is more useful in canes. Now another technique that works really well with this clay is Mokume gane, and here's a very simple one that I did, and you can see that it has a really interesting effect. Now bear in mind that again, because of the texture, when you use a blade to drag across your Mokume gane, you're going to find that it drags a bit and you're going to have some crumbling, so you might find that a little irritating, and it can cause you to make some mistakes. Like here, I dipped a little bit too deep in the design, but in general it's not too big of a hindrance. And also I find that the texture creates this really interesting kind of blurry effect to the Mokume gane, which actually gives it something that reminds me of tie-dye. So again, pros and cons there. If you want a really sharp, crisp image, may not necessarily be the best clay for it, but if you want something that has an interesting, unique effect to it, such as this, if we did this in some greens and reds with blues and yellows, it would create a really beautiful tie-dye effect. So I may also explore that in the future, so keep that in mind when you're working with Mokume gane. Okay, and finally we have a mixed media piece. Now under this metal leaf part we have alcohol ink, and you can see that it blends really nicely onto the clay. It doesn't react in a strange way in comparison to other clay brands, so if you use alcohol inks on other brands, you'll find that alcohol ink works pretty much the same way on the Publis clay brand. Also, this is metal foil. It's the one where you have to rip the mylar off and the foil gets left on the clay. This brand works really well for that because the clay itself, once conditioned, is quite sticky, and so the foil has a really easy time coming off. So you can see here how beautiful of a pattern that is. So as far as mixed media works, this brand works really well, as you can see. Now the final thing that I want to go over is the strength of the clay, which is generally the most important point. Okay, so for our strength test, I mixed together some scrap clay from my Mokume gane and mixed media piece that I showed you earlier. And I baked one for 40 minutes and one for 15 minutes. 15 is the recommended time on the packet, but I generally bake my clay for 40 minutes, so let's see which one is the strongest. I have a feeling that the 40-minute one is going to be the strongest, because generally I don't go with the manufacturer's recommended time. So let's see. So you can see there when I tried to fold it, it does give way, so that's not great. But again, this is only 15 minutes. So let's give this one a try. This is a 40-minute one. You can see again that one also gets some stress lines, but if I bend it here, you can see that it doesn't crack nearly as easily. It takes, like, I'm pressing really hard trying to get that to break, but it's not breaking. If I bend it over again, let's see, and there we go, that's starting to break, but you can see that it hasn't broken nearly as easily as the other one. And bending it over fully definitely puts it under pressure. So it's fairly strong. It's not the strongest clay brand, but it's pretty decent, and considering that this is about 2 millimeters thick, that's pretty strong. The thinner the clay is, like generally if you were going to make a bracelet, this would be the recommended thickness, but if you wanted to make it even thinner, it would probably have a lot more flexibility to it, but in general it is pretty strong. So I would recommend baking it at least 40 minutes to maybe even 60. I would not go at the 15-minute mark. I think that that's not long enough for it to be strong. But in general, it's a pretty decent strength of clay, so pretty happy with that. So that's basically it for the review. Hopefully it was helpful and demonstrated why this brand is a good brand to try out. I will post a link in the description below the video so that you can go and see the store where it is supplied. I will have that in the description below the video, so be sure to check that out. And if there are other brands of clay, tools, supplies, or things like that that you would like me to review, let me know in the comments below and I'll see about getting to them. And as always, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.